Let's take a moment and thank our sponsor, Text Control. There's always something new from Text Control. As a developer, do you need to integrate PDF generation, document editing, or electronic signatures into your ASP.NET Core or Angular applications? Or maybe you want to learn more about the differences between electronic and digital signatures. Text Control is offering a free consulting service to educate you about digital document processing and how Text Control products can help you add these features to your applications. You just go to textcontrol.com/contact and you can request your free personal consultation. How cool is that? Textcontrol.com/contact and you can request a free personal consultation from our friends at Text Control. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Corey Weathers. He's a developer relations leader at Okta. He has a BS in computer science from Howard and an MBA from UC Berkeley. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Scott. How you doing?
I am chilling. I'm feeling pretty good. You have an MBA and a computer science degree. Are you that's really interesting. You know, my wife has an MBA but is a nurse. And I've been going around thinking maybe I need to get an MBA because I don't really understand business. But when I see someone who has a foot in business and a foot in tech, I think to myself, this is probably a more well-rounded person.
I like to think so. My kids probably would say the opposite.
Why an MBA and not a master's in computer science?
Okay, so if you want the real truth, the reason why I got my MBA, like why I started my MBA journey, was because I almost got fired from Microsoft. And I won't go too deep into that story. You know, when you work for a big enough company, there are times where you end up in a organization or with a manager or a team that is, not the right fit for you. And it does take some time to really figure out what the right fit really means. I'd come to a part of my journey where I said, look, I wanted to be more in control of my career. I wanted to be more in control of the outcomes for my career. And I was very convinced that going the startup route was it. And at that time, I was in the Bay Area. And so I went to one of the best programs in the United States at UC Berkeley, which was a fantastic experience, but definitely was the right thing for me. I'm not saying everyone should do it, but I had a ton of fun doing it.
Okay, but you kind of buried the lead there. If you say I went to an MBA program because this thing was happening at Microsoft, that means that you thought that the MBA program was either an escape hatch or the solution.
Yeah, no, in real talk, I thought it was the escape hatch. And so I was very wrong about that. Yeah, when I started the program, I knew that I wanted to learn the skills to help me efficiently manage a business. I am someone who is always very curious about trying new things, but not necessarily about operationalizing or making it turn into something that can last for a really long time. And so something that I've been thinking about is at that time was, hey, what can I do so that I'm more in control and less doing things that leave me at the whim of other people deciding my fate?
I'm hearing a lot of, this is a very intense time right now. There's a lot of anti-big company, a lot of anti-capitalism, a lot of you're just a cog. And when people get laid off, there's this absolute sense of loss of control. And you were feeling like that was going to happen and you took control and you thought the way to take control was more education and a more diverse skill set.
Yeah, and transparently, what I got from the MBA was a lot less of the escape hatch and a lot more of here are some options to help you navigate how to add that into your day-to-day. And so it was less about, now that I have this MBA, I can go get all of these other jobs, and a lot more about, hey, now that I've gotten access to this degree of knowledge and to the relationships that come from that, what are some different possibilities I want to create for myself, which has been my career, right? My career has very much been one of, I want to go try something. Let me go tinker for a little bit and then go find the next big thing that I'm interested in.
Why do you think people feel locked in? Whether it be my son who is trying to pick his major for college and thinks he has to get it right on the first try, or whether it's someone who may have been at Microsoft or a big company for 5 or 10 years as a engineer. They think, well, that's my job for the next 30 years.
Yeah, I tend to think it's safety and security. Where we are creatures of habit. And there are some folks who, even in their eccentricity and the explorative ways in which they try new things, they literally do have their own sort of habits and patterns around it. And so I think people like that predictability, For me, what I've learned how to take comfort in is my predictability is every so often I'm going to want to switch things up. I do that with my house, where every 6 months I redecorate my living room. And my children are always like, oh, look, daddy moved the chair there. Now we have a lot more space to go play with toys on this part of the floor, which I think is exciting. I'm sure after a certain point, they're going to be like, Dad, stop touching the stuff.
Interesting. And this, I talk a lot about deliberate practice and intentionality. And I've used the term waking up. Like, here's the analogy I use. You're driving a car and you like drive 3-4 blocks and then you wake up in the car and you're like, whoa, because your body was on autopilot. And I've
Yeah.
always felt that applies applies to one's job, where you blink and it's June, and then you blink and it's September, and then you go, "Whoa, I was just kind of like asleep at the wheel."
What I love about that too, about that analogy, is when you wake up, you're not the same person as when you went to sleep, right? So if you think about it through the lens of your career, when you wake up, you now have a different and new set of skills. You now have a different and new set of things you enjoy. You now have a different and new set of challenges that you want to go tackle. And what I'm learning in my career, because I'm still working, is to embrace that, as opposed to, man, I really thought it was going to be just this one way. Sort of to that question of the developer who starts and says, look, I'm just going to stay here for 20 years. That's not to say that they're doing the same job for 20 years. It's more to say that there are parts of their job that they really like to be consistent. And then there are some parts that they embrace as the new challenges come ahead.
You just blew my mind there for a second. This is really interesting. So understanding not just that everything's going to change, but also recognizing that there are things that I like and that I want, just like a pie chart of my job.
That's
What
right.
is the pie chart of stuff I want to be constant? I've always felt like having a good boss was the number one thing. Like that's my rock. That's the base of the pyramid for me. I'm not sure what your experience was like at Microsoft, but I've had only 2 bosses in 16 years. And that was so important. But I'll meet other people who, through no fault of their own, will end up with like 6 bosses in 2 years because of reorgs and acquisitions and stuff.
As large companies go, even as I'm trying to do the count, I've had probably 8 to 10 bosses over my time at Microsoft. And my read on that is it taught me very quickly how to find what I need from my boss, which is a thing that a lot of people don't talk about. But it also made me realize that, when I started my career, I kept saying to myself, hey, I really want to find a job that pays this amount of money. Not, I really want to find an opportunity that gives me these types of experiences. And so now I'm focused a lot less on the job title or, we focus on the pay because we need to continue to make money. But it is also the aspect of, well, what are the things that I want to walk away from this job with? Those are the experiences that I want to gain to help me figure out, here's what comes next, right?
So there's an active management to your philosophy. You're managing your time. You're managing your own psyche. You're listening to yourself and saying, this is what I need right now. You're trying to wake up as much as you can. And by wake up, we mean being present in the moment,
Yes.
in your job, in your career. But you said something I want to dig into. You're managing up. You're managing your boss by making your expectations clear. And I think right now, in the moment that we're in, a lot of people don't feel like they have any control, much less of their boss. There's a lot of dislike of management.
Yeah, it's really hard to feel in control of the things that you can't control. Like I can't necessarily control the amount of budget that my team has. I can't necessarily control what other people think of me, if we're being really honest. I can show up every day, do a really good job, be a really honest worker, and do my hardest. And I will more than likely win some friends and probably piss some people off in the process. What I'm focused less on is what are other people's outcomes that I want to drive. I can't do anything about that. But what I'm focused more on is, well, what are the things that I think I can do that add value to my team, to my business, to what I want for my career? Because this to me is what it means to be in control of your career. You always hear that from managers where it's like, look, I'm really here to just help you, but it's your career. You drive it. Most people don't even know how. Most people don't even know what that means. And so for me, it's very much a question of, hey, what are the things that I want to get out of this? How do I make sure I set myself up for those opportunities? And if I can't do it in this role, then it may not be the right role for me. It's time for me to go find a different one.
I think a lot of people feel like their first 5 to 10 years in tech, though, is their boss giving them a discrete task and saying, do this task, and I need it good, fast, and cheap.
Yes.
And we know the whole joke about you good, fast, or cheap, pick two.
Now pick
But
two.
of
Yeah.
course, the boss wants all three, right? But that's not a senior role where it's like, go and figure out strategically what we need to do for the business. That's go get this dialogue box handled and move on,
And there are times where your career transitions back and forth between both, right? So when I started my career, one of the earliest jobs I had was I was a developer for the IRS. And every task they gave me was a discrete task. Hey, we need you to go code this specific thing. And they had to send me to training and we had to do that. And at that time, I felt like I could do more, which is the reason why I ended up leaving the IRS. But it's also me recognizing that in those discrete tasks, I was doing fantastic work. I was getting all of the experiences that I needed, which was to be a really solid engineer at that time, writing code in COBOL and C++. Now, I think there's a phase and stage to these things that you just almost have to embrace. You do that work for a little bit, you learn what you like and how you respond to it, and then you go to the next thing. That doesn't mean that you won't go back to it, right? Like, because your career is not a stair-step ladder. It's more of a pyramid where you kind of go up and you may move sideways, you may come down a little bit, move back to the left, move up again, right? Like, that's just how it works.
There's a young man at work that I'm doing a little bit of light mentoring with he's a year out of school. He's a Morehouse man. He's clearly very good at his job, and he's being given very discrete tasks. And now one of his tasks is over. You're 24, so there's every day is a growth opportunity. But then there's now what? There's kind of this pregnant pause. Should someone early in career go to their boss and then ask for a new task? Like the dog food feeder, like, I am finished now, give me a new task, push the button? Or should they go and try to stretch beyond their position early in career and offer strategic advice? Or like, how do you make yourself known as not just competent, but thoughtful and ready for the next level?
That's almost a yes and yes question, right? Like, yes, you should make sure you're checking in with your peers and your boss to ensure that they know what it is that you're working on and the quality with which you work. And the reason why is because the other side to this is we often advise folks who are early in their career to sort of like find the low hanging fruit that the team is working through and struggling with. And they can use that as an opportunity to demonstrate value in a way that's different than others think. But one of the flaws in that advice is they may not really even know how to pick their heads up. They really may truly be the type of worker that is, I did A to B. You told me to do A to B and I did it. And so part of where continuing to check in with folks is really healthy is then you'll start to recognize how to pay attention to where C and D start to pop in. And then you can start to say, I saw that. I'm interested in that. And hopefully if you've got a good enough boss, they'll come back and they'll say, hey, we've noticed that you've done A to B really well and you've got an interest in C. Let me help you connect the dots on that opportunity.
Right. And looking for pain.
Yeah.
Is that's where value gets created, whether it be internal pain, like the CI/CD system is having a challenge, or whether it's customer pain. Just
that's right.
Staying awake enough that you can notice the pain and then fix it.
And being honest with yourself about it, as opposed to trying to shrug it under the rug, which a lot of people do just by default, because, embracing pain is not a thing that people are raised with or are taught to do when they're in school. It's very much no, that happened, you're going to get past it. And it's like, no, sometimes you need to sit in that and analyze why it was pain. And then you can find what the solution may be or what some options may be. And when you're early in your career, you can also talk to others and they will help you start to figure out what this looks like.
Yeah. And then building, I was trying to explain to a person who was early in career that, this young gentleman, that when you're 20 years in, when you're 30 years in, you're going to meet people that you saw 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and like, oh, it's that guy again. Like, it's like when you see strangers twice. So there's probably been people that you're working with now that you either worked at your company or worked with you, right? So then you'll have these shared experiences to bond on. And there's just no way to understand how significant it is that you collect people like Pokemon and be cool with them, because the scope of decades in business, people remember, you know what I mean? Like, I know you work with people now at Okta that worked at Microsoft that you didn't work with them at Microsoft. but
Right.
y'all were at the same place at the same time, orbiting around each other. So you have shared experiences, and then culture gets created through those shared experiences.
It reminds me a ton of when I became a parent. Someone said to me, the days are long, but the years are short. And I heard that phrase again the first time as a parent. I was like, oh man, do I get those long days? But now as my children are getting older, I'm like, oh, the years are totally short. Same applies to experiences at work, which is the days will be long. And through those long days, you bond with people and build those experiences together with them in such a way where as the years grow shorter, you start to reach back out to them and say, hey, like we had this in common. Like, just how are you doing? And checking in that way is really healthy as an individual, especially if you're early in your career, because you could do this through the lens of people who you graduated from college with or who you spent time in a boot camp with, is truly just checking back in and using that as a litmus test for like, where are you now versus where were you then? It's a part of that waking up process.
And do I want to work with that person again, whether I join their company or they join my company? Because as I've been telling my son, life is just a big group project, except with adults, right? It's just tall grade school. But like, who do you want in the group project? Do you want the person that's a bummer? Or do you want that person who's excited about the project and they're gonna say that they're gonna do a thing and they're gonna do the thing?
Well, especially too when you don't get to choose the people in your group, which is always right. Like, and so the more you spend time working with people, the more you start to recognize how you show up in the group. But then you also start to recognize where you want or what you want from the other parts of your group. One of the things that my MBA taught me that was a really enlightening thing was to accept that I am not great at everything. And that's like when you go to business school, there's some stuff that you learn because you have to keep up with the pace of the work. They give you business cases every week. You have to take notes. You got to be able to keep up in the conversations in the way that makes sense. And I am someone who is such a perfectionist. I still am in some respects that I would be like, oh, I got to take notes on everything. And I got to be able to answer everything. And I'm just not that person. Like you're not perfect. And so as you think about the group project analogy, what you start to recognize as you check in with yourself is, what am I really good at? And what is someone else really good at that I'm actually not? Or alternatively, what am I really good at? And what am I good at, but I actually don't want to do? Because that's also another part of it, which is really tricky for people to navigate.
Yeah, being a lead, like you're a lead at Okta. I'm a lead now at Microsoft, and I have another gentleman who works for me who is a lead himself. So we call that an M2 or a manager of managers at Microsoft. I thought when I started that I was supposed to be the best, and then I realized it's more like being like Captain America, who's kind of like the weakest Avenger, but
Yes,
he's got good vibes and he's got everyone excited and energized. So like, I'll do anything for Steve Rogers. I would die for him. You know what I mean? But
exactly.
but he's not the guy that you call to lift really heavy stuff.
No. I said this to someone a couple of days ago where I said, part of my job, because they looked at my calendar and they saw how many meetings that I spend time in. And I said, well, a big part of my job is truly to like spend time asking other people's questions. Like, hey, what are you thinking about when you're approaching this work? Or alternatively, as you're doing this, have you considered these factors? Or alternatively, have we connected the dots in a number of different ways? Which is why I love the Captain Planet analogy.
Well, Captain Planet or Captain America, actually, either one of those works.
Either way, right? Because it is one of those where you're like, my superpower is not uniquely what you think it is, but it is still properly positioned within the rest of the team, right? So like without me, the team is going to have some skills that they're going to need to get sorted out and filled and replaced. But with me, when we combine all the powers, here we go. We're one magical team.
Right. Right. And Captain America had that really old phone that he can get everybody on the horn, right?
That's right.
At any moment, because he's got a big Rolodex, right? He's got a big list of contacts. So when you're putting, like, I know you're always hiring, and I see on your LinkedIn, you're always looking for folks. You're using, I assume you're not just looking for anyone. You're looking for people that you can, that get along with, people that you want to go and hang out with and you want to spend time with.
Yeah, we spend a good deal of time, especially in all things hiring. We spend a good deal of time asking ourselves, what do we really need out of the role? And then from there, thinking through what types of candidates can help fill that. And the reason why is because fit is like a really difficult conversation to have. It's not about trying to get someone who fits in with the current team, though there is a dynamic aspect to this, right? But it is about if you come with the right mindset and you bring a certain set of skills, where do we think you would best be able to succeed? And on top of that, where would we need to support you from both like my perspective as a lead, as well as my team's perspective as your peers? And so I spent a ton of time thinking very intentionally about the definition of success in a role and who the successful candidate is that can fill that role.
Okay. So is success delivering the discrete thing? Is it like, is success a document? Is it source code? Is it an initiative? Like, I think when I'm trying to explain this to an early in career person, they can understand the hard stuff. Like, give me an app that does this. Okay, that's discrete. Give me a PowerPoint that says that. Craft an initiative. Whoa, that's squishy, right? That's I think that's the leap, right? Where tactics become strategy.
Yeah.
And I think you learn about that when you do an MBA.
Well, and this is where I also think a ton around like the type of support that a good manager would give you, right? Because in my mind, success will have some discrete factors to it. Yes, you delivered that document. Sure, you checked in that source code within a certain amount of time and with a certain degree of quality. And then there should be room for growth. And if there is not room for growth or an intentional growth plan, then I would say that manager is doing you a disservice. Now, one of the things I loved, we talking about the MBA, we had a class called Leading People that was very much around how do you create a human-centric management approach, not a, hey, we need to drive these business outcomes. Like, yes, we do need to drive the business outcomes, but it's people who are driving those outcomes, not just individual cogs in a wheel who are always pushing like on a manufacturing floor to just get you to a certain quota. And so if you want people to deliver for you, you need to motivate them.
Doesn't it feel like business is squishier than we were told? Like, I guess as a programmer, I just assumed that it would all compile. It's so much dealing with humans.
Yes.
I know that someone's probably like face palming themselves right now, and they're like, Hanselman, you dummy. But you know what I mean? It's as much being therapist and father confessor and kind uncle as it is being a boss.
Well, and so much of this conversation has been about like, how much are you checking in with yourself, right? It's one of those things that I almost wish they spent more time on in university settings and even when it comes to just raising children, right? Like I'm very intentional as an example of giving my children the space to explore their feelings. And a lot of parents see that and they're like, oh, you're such a great dad. I'm like, no, but this should be the norm. Like people need to be allowed to explore what it is that they're experiencing so that then they come out on the other side making definitive decisions that they're confident in, hopefully to the betterment of themselves and the folks around them. But they need that space to be able to do that.
How old are your kids?
8 and 6.
8 and 6. So I've got two that are 2 years apart, and they're 15 and 17.
Oh.
And it's very challenging right now because they have the analytical maturity to like solve calculus problems.
Yes.
But they don't have the emotional maturity to like not yell at each other when there's a sock on the floor or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I'm not trying to be ageist against young people, you know? Like everyone's got a thing that they're good at their age. They have superpowers at their various ages. But I am starting to notice maturity, for lack of a better word. You know, like I'm trying to be inclusive in my language because I realize that I could, you know, insult an entire group of people accidentally with the wrong word. But recognizing that I'm of a certain age and, you know, you're a generation behind, but we are still not in our 20s anymore.
Yeah.
It's challenging.
I would say that's even the reason why, right? It's why it is that we have to be even that much more intentional about checking in with the way we experience things and the way that other people experience it differently. And if I'm thinking about like the beginning of my career, I was so hungry. I was so hungry to like pay off my student loans. And I was so hungry to get myself established because I came from poverty and this was a different level of wealth and quality of living for me. And now I'm hungry in a different way. Now the hunger is less about chasing after money or, you know, going after the next big promotion. It's very much about like, what can I do to help other people be successful in a way where they can then attribute some of that back to me, some of that back to experiences that we've shared together. And then what can I do to scale that? Right. So this is why I feel like I'm in the right role. But alternatively, I could easily see me in 2 years saying, okay, I want a different opportunity. I wouldn't be surprised.
So this is funny because 15 to 18 years ago, you were a teacher.
Yeah.
So what you just described is being a teacher. So here you are with a career that has spanned the IRS and Microsoft and Twilio and Auth0 and Okta, and you were a performance engineer and a tester but you're a teacher is what you're saying, which is what I have decided that I identify as throughout my career. If there's one thing I do, it's be a teacher.
In your heart, you sort of recognize attributes of roles that just relate to you as time gets on. I think it's also why titles, I have a career coach who always says to me, titles matter, but to the people that care about them, right? And I often will say, yeah, but I don't really care about them. And it's because they don't motivate me to take certain actions or behave in a certain way. But as you talk about me being a teacher, I'm teaching every single day today, doing all things developer relations and all things developer relations leadership. And so because that's the case, I both get a ton of joy out of that and it drains me. So I also work really intentionally on refilling my bucket when I need to by disconnecting and just going and hanging out with my kids or taking a drive or hitting the movies or doing something completely not tech related, but hands-on.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot better at the disconnecting part, like a lot better. And actually, here's a true story. Like I was so disconnected this weekend that I forgot completely that I had a report that was due on Monday. So I did have to like go, oh crap, and rush off on Sunday night and finish up a report.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that was a failing, but then I'm realizing it was actually a success because it was an example of how completely disconnected I was.
But shout out to you being able to recognize that for yourself, as opposed to, as we're talking about like this journey of a career and recognizing when something is the right fit versus when it's not. There are some folks who may not be able to pick their heads up and say, I spent 80 hours working this week. I deserve a 2-hour break or however long that number is, right? It's a skill that I'm also continuing to work on. This weekend, I went out to a party and had a ball. I mean, just the best time. And I'll be back in the woods in about 3 weeks as my disconnecting time for my birthday. This is what we do to make ourselves happy.
Yeah. And knowing that you need that is a big part of being grown. So my son got his first job last week. He's a dishwasher. And he found out that I'm not paid by the hour. And he is having his trouble getting his head around that.
Yep.
So he assumed like on a Sunday night, if I run into my office, I'm punching in. Like I punch in and go work 2 hours. And so I come back out after 2 hours and he's like, how much did you get paid for working on a Sunday? And it was it's a very different, like some people are paid by the hour and some people aren't paid by the hour. It's like, well, yeah, but how do you know how much to work? He asked.
This is a generational question that, like, the way that I experienced this as you share that story is when I was getting into the industry at the very beginning of my career, I had a number of different options. One of them was to stay at the IRS. Another one was to join Microsoft. And my dad was like, which one gives you a pension? That's the one you go with. And I was like, wait, but that's not necessarily what makes me happy. He's like, nope, but you got to make sure you got money when it's time to retire. It's an interesting thing that you sort of, as we all navigate this, and we all navigate it through very different experiences, but you start to recognize like, wait, there are some things that are important to me that other people may not recognize. And so even as your son is like, hey, how much did you get paid on Sunday? You're like, well, actually, he's probably starting to catch himself on this journey as well. I think that's a completely healthy thing for him to be navigating. Thankfully, he is you to do it with, as opposed to someone who is not knowledgeable and doesn't know how to speak to or support him through these questions.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. I thought it was important that, like, he's a dishwasher. That's his job at a restaurant. He doesn't have an Intel internship or whatever. Like, I know that this is perhaps old thinking, but I did catering. I worked in a restaurant. I didn't want there's a phrase, I don't know if it's a universal phrase, but like children whose feet have never touched the ground.
Yep.
Where they're just kind of like hovering and they float from, private tutors to soccer, classes to university, and then they get their first house. So, he's working in a kitchen and he comes home smelling like grease and he's talking to people who have all different backgrounds, and some have been incarcerated and some haven't, and some have degrees and some are on the way to a degree. And he's getting a diversity of experience just in the last couple of months that he's been working at this job, that I'm hoping he remembers when he is at a restaurant on the front of house. And he remembers that there's a kid probably in the back right now who's washing dishes.
Yeah, this is why I love doing things like my daughter and I cook sticky toffee pudding together. Food is a big thing in our house, and it is one of her comfort meals. And so one of the things we've been talking a lot about in the past, I call it year and a half, is like respecting the ingredients that we're using to intentionally like nourish ourselves, because we then share that with the rest of the world when we show up in spaces and we're healthy and we're happy. And so as I'm hearing you talk through his experience, what I keep thinking about is like, these are going to be things that just add to his personality and his character. And he's going to find himself, years from now in the same position you and I are in, not necessarily the same job, but asking the same types of questions of like, how can you have more variety or diversity in your experiences so that you can live a more fulfilling life? And I just think that's great because it comes from simple things, just literally not from money, just from being exposed, right? You just go get a job. I had 3 jobs when I was in high school. I had to pay my way through college, right? My children's mom had to do the same. It's one of the things where it's like, you just come to recognize the more you expose yourself, the more you embrace this question of like, everyone's experiences are supposed to be different, and that's okay. Yes.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Corey Weathers, for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me, Scott. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, man.
We have been chatting with Corey Weathers. He's the America's DevRel lead at Okta, and this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.